Imagine sitting down for your engagement dinner, only to realize it's actually your funeral. Don Antonio thought he had it all: the power, the money, and the perfect fiancée. But the only person in that restaurant who actually cared about his life was a stranger, a terrified waitress who risked everything to pass him a secret note. The note didn't just save his life, it revealed a betrayal so deep it would burn the city to the ground. We're about to dive into this insane story of betrayal and survival. But real quick, I need to be honest with you guys. I made a massive promise to my mom. I told her that if I worked hard enough, I could build a community here and make her proud of what I create. It's a big goal, but I know I can do it with your help. So, if you want to see how this boss escapes and help me keep that promise to my mom, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. It would mean the world to me and her. Now, let's see how he gets out of this. They say a man's greatest weakness walks beside him wearing perfume and a smile. I never believed that until the night Serafina tried to kill me. My name is Don Antonio Volante, and I've ruled the southern districts of this city for 12 years. 12 years of blood, strategy, and building an empire that lesser men could only dream about. I came from nothing, absolutely nothing. My father died in a gutter with a needle in his arm when I was 7. My mother cleaned houses until her hands bled just to keep us in a roach-infested apartment that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. I watched her pray every night to saints that never answered. Watched her age 20 years in 5. Watched her die believing God had forgotten our address. I learned early that mercy is a luxury for people who've never been hungry. By 16, I was running numbers for the Castellano family. By 20, I'd orchestrated a takeover so clean that old man Castellano himself shook my hand before I put a bullet between his eyes. Respect in this world isn't given. It's taken with interest. The thing about power is that it's intoxicating. Not the money, though God knows I have enough to burn. Not even the fear in people's eyes when they hear my name. It's the control. The ability to reshape reality according to your will. To decide who eats and who starves. Who lives and who becomes a cautionary tale whispered in dark corners. But even emperors need empresses. Or so I thought. Serafina Navarro walked into my life like dawn breaking over a battlefield. I met her at a charity gala, one of those insufferable events where the wealthy pretend to care about the poor while drinking champagne that costs more than most people's monthly rent. She was different from the usual vultures circling my money. Elegant without trying. Intelligent without being threatening. She had this way of looking at me like she saw past the reputation, past the violence, straight into whatever soul I might have left. She told me she was an art dealer, traveling between Milan and New York, brokering sales for private collectors who preferred discretion. The kind of work that required connections, trust, and a comfort with gray areas. In other words, perfect for someone in my world. She understood that beauty and danger often share the same bed. We courted for 8 months. 8 months of opera houses and midnight conversations, of her hand in mine at sunrise, of believing that maybe, just maybe, I could have something real in a life built on lies. She never flinched at my reputation, never asked me to be anything other than what I was. That should have been my first warning. Love makes fools of even the wisest men, and I was no exception. 3 weeks before that fateful night, I asked her to marry me. We were in my penthouse overlooking the city, the lights below twinkling like fallen stars. I had the ring custom made, a blood diamond surrounded by sapphires the color of midnight. Not because I'm a romantic, but because I wanted everyone to know that Serafina belonged to me, that she was protected by my name, my power, my wrath. She said yes with tears in her eyes. I mistook them for joy. The engagement dinner was her idea. Something intimate, she'd said, running her fingers through my hair that morning. Just us. Maybe a few of your closest people. I want to celebrate this properly, Antonio. I want to show you how much this means to me. I agreed because I was a fool drunk on the fantasy of normalcy. Even killers dream of coming home to someone who doesn't count the blood under their fingernails. She chose the restaurant, La Stella d'Oro, an upscale Italian place in the financial district. Neutral territory. Classy. The kind of establishment where city officials and corporate executives make deals over veal marsala and don't ask too many questions about their dining companions. I should have wondered why she insisted on that specific location. Should have questioned why she was so particular about the reservation time, the table placement, the guest list. But suspicion is exhausting when you're tired of being suspicious. I wanted to trust her. Needed to believe that something in my life could be pure. The day of the dinner, I felt off. Nothing I could name, just a whisper of unease dancing along my spine. My consigliere, Dante, noticed my hesitation as I was getting dressed. "You don't have to go through with this," he said, adjusting his cufflinks in my bedroom mirror. "Nobody would blame you for keeping things as they are." I'm 42 years old, Dante. How much longer am I supposed to live like a ghost? He studied me with those calculating eyes that had helped me survive countless power plays. Ghosts live longer than men who let their guard down. I laughed it off. Told him he was paranoid. Told him that not everything was a conspiracy. That sometimes a cigar was just a cigar, and an engagement dinner was just an engagement dinner. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. That was always Dante's way. Advice given once, consequences accepted without judgment. I wore my best suit that evening. Charcoal gray, Italian cut, with a burgundy pocket square that Serafina had given me. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. When had I become someone who cared about pocket squares and whether his shoes matched his belt? When had Antonio Volante, the man who'd clawed his way out of hell with bloody fingernails, become domesticated? The drive to La Stella d'Oro was quiet. My driver, Enzo, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. The streets were slick with recent rain, reflecting neon and headlights in abstract patterns that reminded me of blood swirling down a drain. I should have turned around. Should have listened to that primal instinct screaming that something was wrong. But I didn't. Because I wanted to believe in Serafina more than I wanted to believe in my own survival instincts. We arrived at 7:30, exactly as planned. The restaurant glowed warm and inviting, its windows fogged slightly from the heat inside meeting the cool autumn air. Dante was already there, along with 4 of my most trusted men, Nico, Tomas, Giovanni, and Luca. They stood outside, smoking and talking in that casual way that armed men have when they're pretending not to be on alert. "She's inside," Dante said as I approached. "Been here for 20 minutes. She's nervous." "Nervous good or nervous bad?" I asked. He paused just long enough to make my stomach tighten. "I can't tell." I should have walked away right then. Should have listened to Dante's instincts, which had kept me alive through 3 attempted coups and more betrayals than I could count. But pride is a dangerous thing. I wasn't about to let my own engagement dinner become the moment I revealed weakness, uncertainty, fear. So I walked through those doors like a man walking toward his own execution, which I suppose I was. The restaurant was beautiful, all warm wood and soft lighting, with wine bottles lining the walls like ancient sentinels. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, something by Vivaldi, if I remembered correctly. The scent of garlic and fresh bread filled the air, mixing with expensive perfume and the metallic tang that always follows violence, even when it's still hours away from arriving. Serafina was at our table near the back, positioned perfectly where she could see the entire restaurant, but remain partially hidden by a decorative column. She wore a dress the color of blood, scarlet silk that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her dark hair was swept up, exposing her neck, and diamond earrings caught the candlelight with every movement of her head. She was breathtaking. She was poison. I just didn't know it yet. "Antonio," she breathed, standing to kiss me. Her lips were soft against mine, but there was something mechanical about it, something rehearsed. "You look incredible." "You're worth dressing up for," I replied, pulling out her chair before taking my own seat across from her. Our table was set for two, intimate and romantic, exactly as she'd requested. Through the window beside us, I could see Dante and the others taking positions outside, their presence both comforting and damning. Even at my engagement dinner, I needed armed guards. What kind of life was this? "I ordered champagne," Serafina said, gesturing to the bottle already sitting in an ice bucket beside our table. "The 1996 Dom Pérignon. Your favorite." It was my favorite. I'd told her that on our third date, surprised that she'd remembered such a small detail. Now that memory felt like a weapon she'd been sharpening all along. A waitress appeared at our table, young, maybe 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much for her age. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured our champagne, and she kept glancing toward the kitchen with barely concealed panic. At the time, I thought she was just starstruck or nervous about serving someone of my reputation. I didn't realize she was the only person in that building who wanted me to live through the night. The thing about betrayal is that it always announces itself in whispers before it arrives screaming. I just wasn't listening. Serafina raised her champagne flute, the crystal catching the light like frozen tears. "To us," she said, her voice smooth as silk over a blade. "To the beginning of everything." "To everything," I echoed, touching my glass to hers. The sound of crystal kissing crystal is supposed to be elegant, celebratory. Instead, it sounded like a death knell. I took a sip, letting the champagne dance on my tongue. Crisp, expensive, perfect. Serafina barely touched hers, I noticed. She just watched me over the rim of her glass with eyes that suddenly seemed like a stranger's. "You seem distracted," I said, setting down my flute. "Something wrong?" No, I'm just taking it all in. This moment. You. Us." She reached across the table and took my hand, her fingers cool despite the warm restaurant. "I want to remember everything about tonight." People always want to remember their victories, I thought later. They want to savor the moment they pulled off the impossible. The auburn-haired waitress returned to take our orders. Her name tag read Ivy. Simple, earthy, the kind of name you don't forget. Her hands were still shaking, and when she pulled out her notepad, she nearly dropped it. I caught her eye, and for just a second, I saw something there. A warning? A plea? It vanished so quickly, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. "The lady will have the bronzino," Serafina said, without looking at the menu. "And he'll have the ossobuco. We'll start with the burrata and prosciutto." She'd ordered for both of us. Another thing that should have raised flags. Serafina had always made a point of letting me make decisions, understanding that control was currency in my world. Why was she suddenly directing everything? Actually, I said, my instincts finally beginning to wake up, I think I'll have the— Trust me on this, Antonio, Serafina interrupted, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The ossobuco here is legendary. I ordered it specifically for you. The waitress, Ivy, had gone pale. She was staring at Serafina with barely concealed horror, then at me with something that looked like pity. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Are you all right? I asked her directly, my voice carrying the authority that made grown men confess their sins. Yes, sir. I'm fine. I'll put this in right away. She practically fled from our table, moving so fast she bumped into another server and had to catch herself against the wall. Nervous girl, Serafina commented, taking another pretend sip of champagne. Probably intimidated by you. You know how people get. I did know. Fear was an old friend, one I'd cultivated carefully over the years. But what I'd seen in Ivy's eyes wasn't fear of me. It was fear for me. There's a difference, and once you've lived in my world long enough, you learn to read it. The restaurant was filling up with the evening crowd. Businessmen celebrating deals, couples on date nights, a family in the corner marking someone's birthday with cake and laughter. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that they were dining in the same room as death waiting to be served. Dante appeared at the window, catching my eye. He tapped his watch and held up all 10 fingers. 10 minutes. That was our signal. Check-in times to make sure everything was secure. I nodded slightly, and he disappeared back into the shadows where men like us lived most comfortably. Tell me something, I said to Serafina, leaning back in my chair and studying her the way I studied business partners before deciding whether to enrich them or erase them. Why did you really choose this place? For just a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. I saw calculation flash across her features, saw her weighing options and outcomes with the speed of someone who'd planned this conversation 1,000 times. Then the loving fiancé was back, all soft smiles and wounded innocence. Because it's beautiful. Because I wanted somewhere special for us. Why are you being so paranoid? Paranoia has kept me alive this long, I replied. Humor me. She sighed, playing the part of the patient woman dealing with her difficult man. Fine. If you must know, I have a small confession. I've been planning something special for tonight, beyond just the dinner. A surprise. But if you're going to interrogate me like one of your business associates, you'll ruin it. A surprise. God, how I learned to hate that word. Before I could press further, our appetizer arrived. Ivy placed the plate between us with such care it was almost ceremonial. The burrata glistened white and creamy against the dark wood, the prosciutto draped artfully around fresh basil and heirloom tomatoes. It looked like art. It looked like innocence. As Ivy turned to leave, something fell from her apron pocket, a small slip of paper that fluttered to the ground beside my chair. She froze, her entire body going rigid. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw absolute terror. Not of me, not of Serafina, of what was about to happen. You dropped something, Serafina said coldly, her voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. Ivy bent down quickly, but I was faster. Years of surviving assassination attempts had given me reflexes most men only dream about. My hand shot out and grabbed the paper before she could retrieve it. It was folded tightly, warm from being clutched in her trembling hand. "I'm so sorry," Ivy whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. "Please, I'm so sorry." She wasn't apologizing for dropping the paper. She was apologizing for what it said. Serafina's face had transformed into something I'd never seen. Cold, calculating, furious. "Antonio, don't—" But I was already unfolding it. And there, in shaky handwriting that betrayed absolute terror, were 8 words that shattered my world. "It's a trap. Leave now. They're going to kill you." Time stopped. The restaurant sounds faded to white noise. I looked at Ivy, who was backing away with her hands raised like she expected me to shoot her right there. Then I looked at Serafina, my beautiful fiancée, my future wife, the woman I'd trusted with my heart and my life. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The mask had fallen completely, revealing the predator beneath. "You clever little bitch," Serafina hissed at Ivy, standing so abruptly her chair fell backward. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? What they'll do to your family? To everyone you've ever loved?" That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't passion or revenge or a deal gone wrong. This was premeditated, organized. They had leverage over the staff. They'd planned this down to every detail, including ensuring that everyone in the restaurant would be too terrified to interfere. "How long?" I asked quietly, my hand moving slowly toward the gun I always kept at the small of my back. "How long have you been planning to murder me?" Serafina laughed, a sharp, bitter sound devoid of anything resembling the woman I thought I knew. "Since the day we met, you arrogant fool. Did you really think someone like me would fall in love with a thug who smells like gun oil and broken promises? You were a job, Antonio. A very lucrative job." The restaurant had gone silent. Other diners were starting to notice something was wrong. I saw movement near the kitchen. Men stepping out who definitely weren't chefs. They wore dark suits and had that particular stillness that comes with military training. Outside, I heard the unmistakable sound of gunfire. 3 shots, then silence. Dante and my men. My chest tightened. Those weren't my men firing. That was my men being fired upon. How many were already dead? How many of the people I'd trusted with my life had been cut down because I'd been stupid enough to believe in love? "Who hired you?" I demanded, my gun now visible but not yet raised. The men from the kitchen had weapons trained on me. At least 6 of them, maybe more emerging from shadows I hadn't noticed. Professional. Military contractors, not street thugs. Expensive. Someone had paid serious money to make sure I died tonight. "Does it matter?" Serafina asked, straightening her blood-red dress like we were discussing dinner plans instead of my execution. "You've made so many enemies, Antonio. Stepped on so many throats climbing your way to the top. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" "Everyone knows the consequences of moving against me," I said, my voice dropping to that cold register that had made grown men weep. "Everyone knows what happens to people who betray Antonio Volante." "Everyone knew," she corrected, emphasizing the past tense. "But dead men can't take revenge, can they? And in about 3 minutes, you're going to be very, very dead. Your men outside are already finished. The restaurant staff has been paid to forget they saw anything. And I'll walk out of here a wealthy widow-to-be with a very satisfied client." I looked at Ivy, still frozen in terror near our table. This girl, this stranger who owed me nothing, had tried to save my life. had risked everything to pass me that note. While my fiancée, the woman who'd shared my bed and my secrets, had sold me to the highest bidder. "Why are you still here?" I asked Ivy quietly. "Run." "I can't," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They said they'd kill my little sister. She's only 12. They have pictures of her, know where she goes to school, everything. I had to stay quiet. I had to. But I couldn't. I couldn't just let you die without trying to warn you." And there it was. The difference between monsters and humans. Serafina would have watched me bleed out without blinking. But this terrified waitress had risked her sister's life to give a stranger a fighting chance. "What's your sister's name?" I asked. "Violet. Her name is Violet." "Pretty name," I said, then turned to Serafina. "Let the girl go. She's not part of this." Serafina shrugged. "Fine. She's dead anyway. Her sister too, now that she's interfered. We'll handle that after we're done here." I saw red. Not anger. Calculation. I'd spent 12 years building an empire on reading situations and reacting faster than my enemies expected. This was a trap, yes, but it was a trap they'd sprung too early, thanks to Ivy's courage. They'd wanted me comfortable, eating, my guard down and my gun still holstered. Instead, I was standing, armed, and aware. Still outnumbered, still surrounded, still probably going to die. But I'd been outnumbered before. "One chance," I said to everyone in the restaurant, my voice carrying over the terrified silence. "Everyone except the contractors leaves right now. I don't kill civilians. But if you're still here in 10 seconds, you're part of this." The families, the couples, the businessmen, they ran. Some of them didn't even grab their coats, just bolted for the exits like the building was on fire. Within seconds, the restaurant was empty, except for me, Serafina, 6 armed contractors, and Ivy, standing paralyzed by fear. "Ivy," I said softly, "when I move, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Find Dante if he's still alive. Tell him Violet needs protection. He'll understand. Can you do that?" She nodded, unable to speak. Serafina clapped slowly, mockingly. "Very heroic, but you're still dead, Antonio. Even you can't beat 6 trained killers." "No," I agreed, "but I can take you with me." And then I moved. They say your life flashes before your eyes in moments of death. That's a lie. What actually happens is that time crystallizes into something pure and clear. Every detail sharp enough to cut. I saw everything. The contractor's trigger fingers beginning to squeeze. Serafina's eyes widening as she realized her mistake in standing so close to me. Ivy's muscles tensing to run. The way the candlelight reflected off the wine bottles like frozen fire. I was always fastest when everything was falling apart. My first shot went through the contractor nearest the kitchen. Center mass, textbook. He dropped before his finger even finished pulling his trigger. My second shot shattered the decorative mirror behind the bar, raining glass down and creating chaos in the reflection that made targets harder to track. My third shot wasn't aimed at the contractors at all. It was aimed at the light fixture directly above Serafina's head. Crystal and electrical sparks exploded downward. She screamed and dove for cover, which gave Ivy the split second she needed to run. The girl sprinted toward the front entrance like her life depended on it, which it did. I heard her sob as she ran, but she didn't stop. Good. Maybe one innocent person would survive this nightmare. Return fire erupted. I was already moving, diving behind the bar as bullets chewed through wood and shattered bottles. Liquor rained down, mixing with blood. One of the contractors had missed me but hit the bartender who'd been hiding there. The man gurgled once and went still, his eyes staring at nothing. Another civilian dead because of me. Another ghost to add to the collection. I counted shots, counted positions, counted seconds. 4 contractors left. They were spreading out, using professional tactics, bounding overwatch, crossfire angles, forcing me into a kill box. These weren't street thugs. Serafina had hired real soldiers. That took money, connections, and time to arrange. How long had she been planning this? Had she ever felt anything real for me? Or had every kiss, every whispered promise, every moment of tenderness been part of the job? "You can't win this, Antonio." Serafina's voice came from somewhere near our original table. She sounded more annoyed than frightened. "You're trapped, bleeding, alone. Accept it with some dignity." I looked down. She was right about the bleeding. A round had caught my left arm, nothing fatal, but enough to make my grip slippery. I switched my gun to my right hand and checked my ammunition. 6 rounds left. 4 contractors still standing. Math that didn't work in my favor. But math doesn't account for rage. Doesn't account for what happens when a man realizes he's got nothing left to lose except his life, which was already forfeit the moment he walked through those doors. I heard footsteps approaching. 2 contractors moving in coordinated advance. They were good, but they made one mistake. They assumed I'd wait for them to find me, that I'd hunker down and try to survive. Survival was for people who had something to live for. I just wanted to hurt the people who'd betrayed me. I stood up from behind the bar with both hands on my gun. Professional stance, no hesitation. The first contractor's eyes went wide. He'd expected terror, desperation. He got a nightmare with a smile. I put 2 rounds in his chest before he could adjust his aim. He fell backward, crashing through a table. His partner fired, but I was already moving again, using the bar as cover while I circled around. The bullet passed so close to my ear I felt the heat. Another few inches and this story would have ended very differently. 3 left. Serafina and 2 contractors. $20,000 to whoever kills him, Serafina shouted, her voice cracking with panic now. The job was falling apart, and her payday was bleeding out all over La Stella d'Oro's expensive hardwood floors. Boots thundered. They were rushing me now, throwing tactics out the window in favor of overwhelming force. I grabbed a bottle of expensive whiskey off the bar, seemed ashamed to waste it, and hurled it at the nearest contractor's head. It connected with a wet crunch, and he stumbled. I used that half-second to close the distance and put my gun under his chin. "Nothing personal," I whispered, and pulled the trigger. 2 rounds left. 2 contractors. Serafina somewhere in the chaos, probably trying to find an exit. The restaurant's front door exploded inward with a crash that made everyone freeze. Through the smoke and rain stepped a ghost. Dante, covered in blood, limping, holding what looked like an assault rifle liberated from one of the dead men outside. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice rough with pain. "Traffic was murder." The 2 remaining contractors made a fatal mistake. They looked at him instead of me. I used their distraction to shoot one through the side of the head. Dante's rifle barked twice, and the last contractor went down in a heap. Silence. The kind that exists in the space between heartbeats, where you're not sure if you're alive or dead. "The others?" I asked Dante. His face told me everything. Nico, Tomas, Giovanni. Luca. Men I'd known for years. Men who'd trusted me to lead them somewhere other than early graves. All dead. Ambush, Dante said simply. Never saw it coming. They had shooters positioned on the rooftops. More waiting in the cars. Military operation. Someone spent serious money to make sure you didn't walk away tonight. I heard movement. Serafina trying to crawl toward the kitchen exit. I walked over slowly, letting her hear my footsteps, letting her fear build with every echo. She'd wanted me to feel helpless tonight. Fair was fair. She was crying when I found her, mascara running down her face in black rivers. The blood-red dress was torn, and somewhere in the chaos, she'd lost a shoe. She looked nothing like the goddess who'd promised to love me forever. "Antonio, please," she sobbed. "I didn't have a choice. They threatened me, said they'd kill me if I didn't help. You have to understand." "Funny," I said, my voice empty of everything except cold truth. "That's exactly what you said about the waitress's sister. Seems like threatening people is your employer's specialty. Who hired you, Serafina? I'm going to ask one more time." "I can't tell you. They'll kill me." I pressed my gun against her forehead. "I'm going to kill you. Choose your death." She broke. People always do when they realize their story is ending. "Castellano. Victor Castellano. The old man's son. He's been planning this for 12 years, waiting for the perfect moment." Of course. I'd killed his father, taken his empire, and left him alive as a mercy, as a message that I wasn't a monster who murdered children. Victor had been 17 then, just a boy crying over his father's body. I'd told him to disappear, start over, live a clean life. Instead, he'd spent 12 years planning revenge, spent 12 years building resources, making connections, hiring the most beautiful assassin money could buy, and sending her into my life like a guided missile. Where is he? "I don't know, I swear. He contacts me through intermediaries. I've never met him face to face." That was probably true. Victor Castellano was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. He'd learned from his father's mistakes, learned that showing your face gets you killed. What about Ivy's sister, Violet? They have someone watching her. I don't know whom. That was Victor's insurance to keep the staff quiet. I looked at Dante. Find her. Use whatever resources we have left. I want that little girl protected. He nodded and limped toward the exit, already making calls. That was why Dante had survived so long. He didn't ask questions when action was needed. Serafina was looking at me with something resembling hope. She actually thought I might let her live. Thought that maybe her tears and her story about being threatened would earn mercy. "Antonio," she whispered, "I loved you. Part of me really did. That wasn't all fake." "Which part?" I asked. "The part where you chose this restaurant? Or the part where you ordered my last meal? Or maybe the part where you were planning to watch them execute me while you drank champagne?" "Please, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. I'll tell Victor I failed, that you got away. Just let me go." I thought about it. Really thought about it. What would killing her solve? It wouldn't bring back my men. Wouldn't erase the betrayal. Wouldn't make me anything other than what I'd always been. A man who solved problems with bullets. But then I thought about Ivy. Thought about a terrified waitress risking her sister's life to save a stranger. Thought about the kind of courage it took to slip that note, knowing that if she was caught, everyone she loved would suffer. And I thought about Serafina, who'd shared my bed for 8 months and would have watched me die without blinking. You said you wanted to remember everything about tonight, I told her. I'm going to make sure you do. I didn't kill her. Death would have been mercy. And mercy was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Instead, I did something worse. I let her live with the knowledge of what was coming. You're going to deliver a message to Victor Castellano, I said, holstering my gun. You're going to tell him that I'm coming. That I'm going to dismantle everything he's built, piece by piece. Everyone who helped him. Everyone who knew about tonight. Everyone who thought they could kill Don Antonio Volante and walk away. You're going to tell him that he didn't kill me. He just reminded me why mercy is for people who've never been truly hungry. I grabbed her by the hair, forcing her to look at the carnage around us, the bodies, the blood, the shattered dream of what we could have been. And you're going to tell him that this is his fault. Every death from this moment forward, every widow, every orphan, every life destroyed in the fire I'm about to light. He could have killed me and ended it. Instead, he made me angry. Now you both get to live long enough to regret it. I released her, and she collapsed, sobbing to the floor. I walked away without looking back, stepping over bodies of men who'd died because someone decided that 12 years was long enough to wait for revenge. The rain was still falling when I stepped outside. Dante had found Ivy. She was sitting in one of our remaining cars, wrapped in someone's jacket, shaking like she might never stop. When she saw me, her eyes went wide. Your sister will be safe, I told her. I'm sending my best people to find her and relocate both of you. New city, new names, new lives. You saved me tonight. That deserves more than words. I didn't do it for a reward, she whispered. I did it because it was right. Imagine that. In a world where my own fiancé tried to murder me for money, a stranger risked everything because it was right. What's going to happen now? She asked. I looked at the restaurant, at the bodies inside, at the wreckage of what should have been a celebration. Now, I said quietly, now I remind this city why they feared me in the first place. Dante appeared at my side, limping but steady. Violet is secure. I have her at one of our safe houses with 3 guards. She doesn't know what's happening. Thinks she won a contest and got a free vacation. Good. Keep her thinking that. What about Victor? He declared war, I said, getting into the car. He just doesn't know he's already lost. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but they've never felt what I felt driving away from La Stella d'Oro. This wasn't cold. This was an inferno barely contained beneath skin and expensive suits. This was 12 years of trust violated, 4 good men dead, and a betrayal so complete it rewrote everything I thought I knew about human nature. Victor Castellano wanted to destroy me. Instead, he'd just unleashed something that would burn his entire world to ashes. We drove in silence to one of my safe houses, a brownstone in the old industrial district that didn't officially exist in any property records. Dante kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering if I was going to fall apart, if the betrayal would crack something fundamental in my psyche and turn me into the kind of broken man who makes stupid mistakes. He didn't need to worry. I'd already been broken a long time ago. This was just adding new scars to old wounds. Talk to me, Dante finally said, as we pulled into the underground garage. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that mercy was the biggest mistake I ever made, I replied, wincing as I moved my injured arm. The bullet had gone clean through, but it still hurt like hell. I'm thinking that 17-year-old Victor Castellano should have joined his father in the grave. And I let sentiment make me weak. You were trying to be better than your enemies. That's not weakness. It is when your enemies use it to kill your friends. We sat in the car for a moment, neither of us moving. The engine ticked as it cooled, a mechanical heartbeat in the silence. Nico had a daughter, Dante said quietly. She's 3. Just started preschool. My chest tightened. I know. Tomas was getting married next month. Had the venue booked, invitations sent. I know. Giovanni's mother lives in the nursing home we pay for. Without our support, she'll end up on the street within weeks. I know! I snapped, then caught myself. Took a breath. Let the rage settle into something colder and more useful. I know what they had, Dante. I know what they lost. I know what their families will lose. And I'm going to make sure every single person responsible understands that they didn't just kill my men. They killed their own futures. Dante nodded slowly. So what's the plan? First, we stop the bleeding. How many people do we have left? He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. Each name was a life, a loyalty, a weapon I could deploy. Counting everyone? Maybe 40 soldiers still breathing. Another 20 on payroll who could be activated if needed. But Antonio, half of them are going to hear about tonight and decide they'd rather work for someone who isn't currently involved in a war. Then we find out who stays loyal and who runs. The ones who run? Let them. The ones who stay? They get promoted into the positions left empty by better men. I climbed out of the car, my body screaming in protest. Dante rushed around to help me, but I waved him off. Pain was good. Pain reminded you that you were still alive, still fighting, still capable of making your enemies regret they hadn't aimed better. The safe house was sparse, just furniture for function, no decoration, nothing that indicated anyone actually lived there. It was a place to disappear, not a home. I'd had lots of places like this over the years. None of them ever felt like more than expensive cages. The only home I'd imagined having was the penthouse I'd shared with Serafina. Wonder if she'd laughed about that when she was alone. Wonder if she'd mocked my attempts at normalcy while reporting back to Victor about my schedule, my security, my vulnerabilities. Medical kit, I said to Dante. Then get everyone you trust on a secure line. We're having a family meeting. While Dante patched my arm, military field dressing, efficient and painful, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked like hell. Blood on my shirt, bruises forming where I'd been too slow ducking, exhaustion carved into every line of my face. But my eyes were clear, focused. This was the man I recognized, not the domesticated fool playing house with an assassin. This was Don Antonio Volante, the man who'd clawed out of poverty and built an empire on the bones of people who underestimated him. How long have you known? I asked Dante as he tied off the bandage. Known what? That Serafina was wrong, that something about her didn't fit. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady as they worked. I had suspicions. Nothing concrete, just she was too perfect, you know? Too understanding, too comfortable with our world. People who come from the civilian side usually take time to adjust to what we do. She never flinched, never asked questions she should have asked. But I figured maybe she was just built different, or maybe I was being paranoid. You should have told me. Would you have listened? He was right. I wouldn't have. I'd been so hungry for something real, something pure in my corrupted world, that I'd ignored every red flag waving in my face. Love didn't make you stupid. Wanting to believe in love did. Never again, I said quietly. From now on, I trust numbers and bullets. Everything else is just a potential liability. Dante met my eyes in the mirror. Don't let her turn you into something worse than you already were. You're a lot of things, Antonio, but you were never completely heartless. Don't give her that victory. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression went dark. We've got problems. 3 more of our businesses hit in the last hour. The casino in the North District, 2 of our distribution centers. Professional jobs. They knew exactly where to hit and when. Victor's not waiting, I said, feeling a grim satisfaction. He thinks he has momentum. Thinks that if he keeps hitting us while we're reeling, we'll collapse. Will we? No. I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Because he's making the same mistake everyone makes with me. He thinks I'm a businessman who uses violence.
He's about to remember that I'm violence that learned business. Within 2 hours, I had 23 men assembled in the safe house basement. 23 out of 40 meant 17 had either gone to ground or switched sides already. Fine, better to know who your real soldiers were before the war heated up. They looked at me with a mixture of loyalty, fear, and uncertainty. They'd heard about the ambush, knew that Nico, Tomas, Giovanni, and Luca were dead, knew that our organization had been infiltrated at the highest level. These were the ones brave enough, or loyal enough, to show up anyway. I'm going to keep this simple, I told them, standing at the front of the room despite my injuries, despite my exhaustion, despite everything. Victor Castellano has declared war on us. He's spent 12 years planning this, gathering resources, positioning assets. He thought he could take everything I built by cutting off the head. He was wrong. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Here's what's going to happen. Anyone who wants out, leave now. No judgment, no retaliation. This is going to get bloody, and not everyone signed up for a war. But if you stay, if you stand with me, I'm going to give you something that no amount of money can buy. I'm going to give you revenge against everyone who thought they could kill our brothers and walk away. Nobody moved. Not one person headed for the door. Good, I continued, because we're not just fighting back. We're going hunting. Dante has a list of every business, every asset, every person connected to Victor Castellano. Starting tonight, we begin dismantling his operation piece by piece. We hit his money, his supply lines, his allies. We make him understand that what happened tonight wasn't the end of Don Antonio Volante. It was the beginning of his nightmare. A hand went up in the back. Marco, one of my younger soldiers, maybe 25. Boss, what about the police? After tonight, they'll be all over this. The police, I said with a cold smile, are going to be very busy investigating what looks like a random robbery gone wrong at La Stella d'Oro. The restaurant's owner is an old friend who values discretion more than truth. The bodies will be processed as John Does, hired guns with no connections to anyone important. By morning, it'll be just another violent crime in a city full of them. That was the beautiful thing about money and fear properly applied. Reality became whatever story you paid people to tell. What about the fiancée? Someone else asked. She still breathing? For now, I replied. She's going to deliver a message to Victor. Then she's going to disappear. If any of you see her after that, you have standing orders to make her disappear permanently. I pulled out a photo that Dante had provided, a surveillance shot of Victor Castellano taken 3 months ago. He'd grown into his father's face, all sharp angles and cold eyes. This is our target. Everything else is just clearing the path to him. I want information on where he's hiding, who's protecting him, what matters to him. And I want the waitress, Ivy, and her sister Violet protected at all costs. They're off limits to everyone, friend or enemy. Are we clear? Murmurs of agreement. These men understood loyalty, even if it was loyalty bought with fear and money. They understood that if I'd protect a stranger who helped me, I'd burn cities for the people who truly earned my trust. One more thing, I said. Victor wanted to make tonight personal, wanted to use my heart against me. So we're going to respond in kind. Find out what he loves, who he loves, what makes him feel human. And then we're going to take it all away. After the meeting dispersed, Dante and I stood alone in the basement. You really going to torture him with his own medicine? He asked. I'm going to do whatever it takes to end this, I replied. Victor could have shot me in the street, could have bombed my car or poisoned my food. Instead, he made Serafina get close to me for 8 months. Made me believe in something real before trying to take it away. That's not strategy. That's sadism. And sadism deserves an appropriate response. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I opened it, and my blood went cold. It was a photo of Serafina, taken maybe 20 minutes ago. She was in what looked like a warehouse, tied to a chair, beaten badly. Standing behind her with a gun to her head was a figure in shadows, but I could make out enough features to know exactly who it was. Victor Castellano. And below the photo, a message. She failed, so she pays the price. You're next, Antonio. The only question is, who else dies before I get to you? Sleep tight. I showed Dante the phone. He whistled low. Well, that answers the question about whether he's going to drag this out or come at us hard. He just made a mistake, I said quietly. How's that? He thinks I care what happens to Serafina. I deleted the message and pocketed the phone. Let him waste time torturing someone who means nothing to me. Every minute he spends on her is a minute we use to close the net around him. That's cold, even for you. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was exactly the right amount of cold for a man who'd just learned that the woman he loved was willing to watch him die for money. Serafina had made her choices. She'd chosen Victor's money over my life. Now she got to live with the consequences of being expendable to both of us. Get some rest, I told Dante. Tomorrow we start burning Victor's world down. I want to hit 3 of his locations simultaneously. Make him spread his resources thin trying to defend everything. And then? Then we follow the smoke to wherever he's hiding. And I finish what I should have finished 12 years ago. I spent the rest of that night in the safe house, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Serafina's face. Not the monster who'd tried to have me killed, but the woman who'd laughed at my jokes, who'd run her fingers through my hair on lazy Sunday mornings, who'd made me believe that maybe Antonio Volante could be something more than a killer wearing expensive suits. Had any of it been real? Even one moment? One kiss? One whispered promise in the dark? Probably not. And that hurt worse than the bullet wound in my arm. But pain was useful. Pain reminded you not to make the same mistakes. Pain built walls that kept you safe from knives disguised as affection. My phone buzzed again around 3 a.m. Another message, another photo. This time it was Ivy, but she was safe, smiling uncertainly at the camera while holding her little sister. Violet was a tiny thing with braids and a stuffed elephant, completely unaware of how close she'd come to being leverage in someone else's war. Below the photo, a message from one of my guards. Both subjects secure and relocated. New identities being processed. They'll be ghosts by morning. Good. At least something decent came out of this nightmare. At least one person's courage got rewarded with safety instead of punishment. I typed back. Set up a trust fund for both of them. Education, living expenses, whatever they need. Anonymous donor. They don't get to know it came from me. The response came quickly. Understood. Anything else? Yeah. Make sure Ivy knows that kindness isn't always punished in this world. That sometimes it matters. I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince her or myself. As dawn broke over the city, painting the skyline in shades of blood and gold, I stood at the window of the safe house and watched the world wake up. Somewhere out there, Victor Castellano was probably celebrating his victory, probably thinking he'd broken me. He had no idea that he'd just unleashed the version of me that his father died running from. The old Antonio Volante had tried to be merciful, had tried to be better than the violence that created him. That Antonio died in La Stella d'Oro, bleeding out between the appetizers and the main course. The man staring back at me from the window's reflection? He remembered what mercy cost. Remembered that in this world, the only reward for being better was being taken advantage of by people who would never understand the gift they'd been given. Victor wanted war. Fine. But he was going to learn that there's a difference between starting a war and surviving one. And before this was over, he was going to wish his father had taught him the most important lesson about dealing with Antonio Volante. If you come for the king, you better not miss. Because I never did. The thing about declaring war is that it changes you. Not all at once. There's no dramatic moment where you transform into something unrecognizable. It's gradual, like water wearing down stone. Each decision, each kill, each compromise chips away at whoever you used to be, until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize the person staring back. I'd made my peace with that a long time ago. Victor's first real mistake happened 72 hours after La Stella d'Oro. He hit one of my legitimate businesses, a restaurant in the theater district that I'd invested in years ago as a pet project. It was clean money, civilian operation, no connection to anything illegal. He firebombed it at 2 a.m, probably thinking it would be empty. He was wrong. The owner, a woman named Lucia, who made the best carbonara I'd ever tasted, had been doing inventory. She survived, but barely. Third-degree burns over 40% of her body. Her 19-year-old son, who'd been helping her, didn't make it out. That was Victor's mistake. You don't go after civilians. Not because of morality. I'd killed enough people to fill a cemetery and lost my right to moral superiority a long time ago. You don't go after civilians because it's sloppy, because it turns public opinion against you, because it gives your enemy a propaganda victory that's worth more than any tactical advantage. Victor had been in hiding too long. He'd forgotten the rules. I visited Lucia in the hospital. She was wrapped in bandages like a mummy, sedated against pain that even morphine could barely touch. Her sister sat beside the bed, eyes red from crying, and when she saw me, she stood up so fast the chair fell over. "You," she hissed. "This is your fault. Rosa's dead because of you, because of your world." She wasn't wrong. Rosa, Lucia's son, had died because his mother had the bad fortune of taking money from a crime boss who made enemies. In a fair universe, that wouldn't be a death sentence. But we didn't live in a fair universe. I know, I said quietly, and I'm going to make sure the people responsible understand what they've taken from you. Will that bring Rosa back? The sister demanded, tears streaming down her face. Will your revenge make her son any less dead? No, I admitted. But it'll make sure he wasn't the last person they murder for no reason except to hurt me. I left an envelope on the bedside table, enough money to cover all medical bills, funeral costs, and provide for Lucia for the rest of her life. It wasn't penance. Money doesn't buy absolution. But it was acknowledgement that she'd been caught in crossfire not of her making, and the least I could do was make sure she didn't suffer financially on top of everything else. Dante was waiting in the car. That was decent of you, he said as we pulled away from the hospital. Decent would have been never getting her involved in my life in the first place, I replied. This was just damage control. Still, Victor's burning down half the city trying to flush you out. People are noticing. The other families are getting nervous. That was the second part of Victor's mistake. In our world, you don't destabilize the entire ecosystem just to kill one rival. The Commission, the collection of crime families that ran different territories, maintained a delicate balance. We competed, occasionally eliminated each other, but we did it quietly, professionally. Victor's scorched earth approach was threatening everyone's business, which meant he was making me enemies of my enemy's enemy, which meant opportunity. Set up a meeting with the commission, I told Dante. Somewhere neutral. Tell them I want to discuss the Victor Castellano problem. They might decide the easiest solution is to eliminate both of you. They might try, I agreed. But they won't succeed. And right now, I'm the devil they know. Victor's the wild card who's proven he's willing to burn everything down. The meeting happened 3 days later in the back room of a laundromat in Little Italy, neutral territory controlled by the Giordano family. 6 family heads showed up. Sofia Marchetti, who ran the waterfront. Jackson Chen, who controlled the tech sector and most of the city's digital crime. Marcus Webb, old school and traditional, running gambling and protection rackets. Isabella Rousseau, money laundering and high-end theft. Dmitry Volkov, arms dealing and enforcement. And Michael Giordano himself, whose family had been in this city since Prohibition. They looked at me like I was a bomb that might detonate at any moment. Gentlemen, ladies, I said, taking my seat at the table. Thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries, Sophia said, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign on the wall. You've brought a war to our city, Antonio. A messy war that's hurting all of our operations. Give us one good reason why we shouldn't end you right here and gift-wrap your head for Castellano as a peace offering. Because Victor Castellano isn't interested in peace, I replied calmly. He's interested in chaos. He firebombed a civilian restaurant, killed a 19-year-old kid. That's not strategy. That's instability, and instability is bad for all of our businesses. Maybe, Jackson Chen said, his voice measured and careful. But you're the one he's after. You're the reason he's tearing up the city. The logical solution is to remove you from the equation. I'd expected this, prepared for it. The logical solution, I countered, is to ask yourselves what happens after Victor kills me. Do you really think he's going to just stop? That he's going to politely divvy up my territory and go back to running his operations quietly? He's been planning this for 12 years. That's not revenge, that's obsession. And obsessed men don't stop until they've destroyed everything, or been destroyed themselves. Silence around the table. They knew I was right. So what are you proposing? Isabella asked. That we go to war with Castellano on your behalf? I'm proposing that we end this before it gets worse. I'll handle Victor personally, but I need you to cut off his resources, his supply lines, his safe houses. Make it so that every time he tries to strike at me, he finds doors closed. Make him realize that he's not fighting one man. He's fighting the entire structure that keeps this city running. And what do we get in return? Dmitri asked, his Russian accent thick as ever. My territory, I said simply. When this is over, assuming I survive, I'm going to need to rebuild. That means I'll be vulnerable for a while. I'll need allies, not enemies. Support me now, and you'll have my gratitude and my resources when you need them. They exchanged looks. This was the language they understood. Mutual benefit, strategic alliances, the kind of calculated cooperation that kept the criminal ecosystem functioning. You're asking a lot based on your word, Michael Giordano said. How do we know you won't just eliminate Victor and then come after us one by one? Because I'm tired, I admitted. And maybe it was the exhaustion in my voice that sold it.
I'm tired of watching people die because of decisions I made years ago. I'm tired of building something only to watch it burn. Victor wants to destroy me? Fine. But when I'm done with him, I'm done with wars. I just want to run my businesses and be left alone. It was partially true. The part about being tired was real enough. The rest, well, they didn't need to know my long-term plans. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you truly trusted? Think about it for a second. How did it change you? Did it make you harder? More careful? Or did you find a way to trust again? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious how you guys handle betrayal, because honestly, it's something we all face in different ways. Sophia stubbed out her cigarette. I'll support this. Victor's methods are sloppy, and sloppy is dangerous for all of us. But Antonio, if you drag this out, if you make it worse, we'll cut you loose. Understood? One by one, the others nodded agreement. Not friendship. This world didn't do friendship. But temporary alliance based on mutual self-interest, which was as close to trust as anyone got. Then we have an understanding, I said. Victor Castellano will be dead within 2 weeks. And after that, we all go back to making money instead of corpses. The meeting broke up shortly after. As I was leaving, Jackson Chen pulled me aside. A word of advice, he said quietly. When you find Castellano, make it quick. Don't torture him. Don't drag it out. Just end it and move on. Why? Because the longer you stare into the abyss, the harder it is to look away. You've already lost people you cared about. Don't lose yourself, too. I appreciated the sentiment, but he didn't understand. I'd lost myself a long time ago. Everything since was just pretending I hadn't. With the Commission's support, Victor's operations began crumbling. His safe houses were raided by people he'd thought were allies. His supply lines dried up. His money got frozen in accounts he'd assumed were secure. Within a week, he went from being a rising threat to being a man on the run. And running men make mistakes. The break came from an unexpected source, Serafina, or rather, her body. Victor had gotten bored with torturing her and had dumped her remains in the harbor. When the police fished her out, they found something interesting. A GPS tracker embedded in her clothing. Not one of Victor's, one of mine.
I'd had it sewn into her jacket months ago, back when I'd actually cared about her safety. The tracker had recorded her movements before she died, and the last location it pinged from was a warehouse in the industrial district, abandoned for years, supposedly condemned. Could be a trap, Dante warned as we prepared to move on the location. Everything's a trap, I replied, checking my weapons. The question is whether we're smart enough to spring it on our terms instead of his. We hit the warehouse at dawn with 20 men, military precision, every angle covered. The building was exactly what it looked like, abandoned, rotting, perfect for someone who needed to disappear. We cleared it room by room, finding evidence that Victor had been there recently. Takeout containers, a mattress, ammunition boxes, but no Victor. "He's gone," one of my men called out. "Cleared out maybe 6 hours ago." I was about to agree when I noticed something odd. Scuff marks on the floor leading to what should have been a solid wall. I pressed against it, and the wall swung inward, revealing stairs leading down into darkness. "Of course," I muttered. "Can't just hide in a warehouse. Has to have a secret underground lair like some kind of supervillain." We descended carefully, weapons ready. The basement was surprisingly well appointed. Generator, supplies, computer equipment. Victor had been planning to wait us out down here, living like a rat until he could scurry away to wherever he'd planned his escape. But something had spooked him, made him run before he was ready. On the desk was a laptop, still open, still powered. Dante immediately started going through it. "Encrypted," he said, "but sloppy encryption. Give me a minute." While he worked, I explored the rest of the space. There were maps on the wall, my businesses marked in red, my properties circled, my known associates photographed and cataloged. 12 years of obsessive research, all displayed like a serial killer's trophy room. And there, in the corner, was a photo that made my blood run cold. It was me and Victor's father, taken the night I killed him. I didn't even know this photo existed. Old man Castellano was on his knees, and I was standing behind him with a gun to his head. But what made my stomach turn was the corner of the frame. You could just barely see a teenage boy's face, watching from a doorway. Victor. He'd witnessed his father's execution. I'd told him to leave, told him to go upstairs and not come down until it was over. He hadn't listened. He'd watched the whole thing. Watched me pull the trigger. Watched his father's body slump to the floor. That's when I understood. This wasn't about business, or territory, or power. This was about a boy who'd watched his father die and spent 12 years building himself into someone capable of revenge. This was personal in a way that no amount of strategic thinking could account for. "Got it," Dante said, pulling up files. "Jesus Christ, Antonio. You need to see this." The laptop contained everything. Every plan Victor had made, every person he'd bribed or threatened, every detail of the assassination attempt at La Stella d'Oro, including the name of the person who'd helped him set the whole thing up. My blood froze as I read the name. Vincent Moretti. My accountant. The man who'd handled my finances for 8 years. The man who had access to everything. My accounts, my properties, my legitimate businesses. The man who'd recommended La Stella d'Oro for my engagement dinner.
He didn't just infiltrate your personal life with Serafina, Dante said quietly. He infiltrated your entire organization. Every financial decision you've made for the past year, every property you've bought, every business you've invested in. Moretti was feeding that information to Victor. He was hollowing you out from the inside. I felt sick. Not from fear, but from the realization of how thoroughly I'd been played. Victor hadn't just tried to kill me.
He'd tried to systematically destroy everything I'd built, piece by piece, using my own trusted people as weapons. "Where's Moretti now?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Dante checked his phone. Last known location was his office downtown. But Antonio, if Victor's running, he might try to tie up loose ends. Moretti could already be— "I don't care if he's dead or alive," I interrupted. "I care about what he knows, about where Victor's running to. Get me to that office. Now!" We left half our men to secure the warehouse and took the rest with us downtown. Moretti's office was in a high-rise in the financial district, all glass and steel and corporate respectability. The kind of place where white-collar criminals made millions while looking down on street thugs like me. His secretary tried to stop us. "Sir, you can't just—" "I'm not here for permission," I said, walking past her. "I'm here for answers." Moretti was at his desk, frantically packing papers into a briefcase. When he saw me, his face went white. "Antonio, I'm just organizing some files for the quarterly—" "Don't insult both of us with lies," I said, closing the door behind me. "We know about Victor. We know you've been helping him. The only question is whether you tell me where he's running to, or whether I make this very unpleasant for you." He started crying. Actually crying. Tears streaming down his face as he realized his betrayal had been discovered. "I didn't have a choice," he sobbed. "Victor threatened my family. Said he'd kill my wife, my daughters. I had to cooperate. You understand, right? You would have done the same. Maybe. Maybe if I had people I loved enough to betray for. But I didn't. That was probably the biggest difference between men like Moretti and men like me. I'd long ago accepted that everyone I cared about would eventually become leverage against me. So I'd stopped caring. "Your family is safe," I told him, which was probably true. Victor doesn't waste resources on threats he doesn't need anymore. But I need to know where he's going, what his escape plan was. Moretti hesitated. I pulled out my gun, not to threaten, just to remind him of the reality we were operating in. He broke almost immediately. "Mexico," he said. "He has a compound outside Tulum. Bought it under a shell corporation 5 years ago. He's got passports, money, everything he needs to disappear. There's a private plane waiting at a municipal airport upstate. He's supposed to leave tonight. Flight number, tail number, exact location." Moretti pulled up files on his computer, printing everything. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely feed the paper into the printer. When he handed me the documents, he looked like a man staring at his own obituary. "Are you going to kill me?" he asked quietly. I considered it. He'd betrayed me, helped orchestrate the deaths of my men, facilitated an assassination attempt that had come within inches of succeeding. In my world, that was a death sentence. No trial, no appeal, just quick justice delivered from a gun barrel. But Jackson Chen's words echoed in my head. "Don't lose yourself." "No," I said finally. "But you're done. Finished in this city. You're going to transfer all my accounts to new management, provide all passwords and access codes, and then you're going to disappear. Change your name. Move your family somewhere far away. And if I ever see you again, if I ever hear your name in connection with anything involving me, the mercy I'm showing you today will evaporate. Understood?" He nodded frantically. Yes. Thank you. God, thank you." "Don't thank God," I said, holstering my gun. "Thank the fact that I'm too tired to keep killing people. You're just lucky you caught me on a day when I'm trying to remember what it feels like to be human."
We left him there, a broken man packing up the pieces of a life that had just imploded. Another casualty of Victor's war, though one who'd survive it. The municipal airport was 2 hours north. We drove in silence, each of us preparing for what was coming. This would be the end, one way or another. Either Victor got away and I spent the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, or I ended this tonight and could finally start rebuilding. The airport was small, maybe 6 hangars and a single runway, the kind of place where rich people kept private planes and didn't ask questions about flight plans. We arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. Victor's plane was already there. Sleek, white Gulf Stream, engines warming up. I could see figures moving around it, preparing for takeoff. Last chance to call this off, Dante said. We could let him run. Let him disappear and become someone else's problem. No, I said quietly. He doesn't get to walk away. Not after Nico. Not after Tomas, Giovanni, Luca. Not after Rosa, that kid who died in the restaurant. He wanted war. He gets to see how wars end. We moved in fast, using the other hangars for cover. My men spread out, cutting off escape routes. The plane's crew saw us coming and scattered. They were just hired help, not soldiers, and they had no interest in dying for someone else's revenge. Which left Victor alone on the tarmac, standing at the foot of his plane stairs, staring at me as I approached. "Antonio," he called out, his voice surprisingly calm. "I was hoping you'd figure it out in time."
Would have been anticlimactic if I'd just disappeared. That's one word for it, I replied, my gun trained on him. I can think of others. I'm sure you can. He smiled, and it was his father's smile, cold and calculating. Tell me something. Do you even remember killing my father? Or was he just one corpse in a long line of bodies you've left behind? I remember, I said. I remember him begging. Remember him trying to bribe me, threaten me, reason with me. I remember pulling the trigger and feeling nothing.
"And that's why you have to die," Victor said simply. "Not because you killed him, because you felt nothing. Because you took everything from me and it meant nothing to you. You continued your life like his death was just another Tuesday. That's the injustice I've spent 12 years trying to correct." He pulled out a gun, not to shoot, just to hold. 2 men standing on a runway, both armed, both knowing how this had to end. "I could have killed you 100 times," he continued. "Could have shot you in the street or blown up your car. But I wanted you to feel it. Wanted you to experience loss. That's why Serafina. That's why your men. That's why every piece of your empire I've systematically destroyed. I wanted you to understand what you took from me." "And did it work?" I asked. "Do you feel better now? Does my suffering balance the scales for your father's death?" He laughed bitterly. "No, nothing balances. That's what I've learned. Revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't bring anyone back. It doesn't make the pain stop. It just perpetuates. Creates more pain, more death, more young men watching their fathers die." For just a moment, I saw the 17-year-old boy in that doorway, watching his world end. Then the moment passed, and he was just another enemy who needed eliminating. "So why continue?" I asked. "Because stopping means admitting that everything I've done, every life I've taken, every deal I've made with my conscience, it was all meaningless. And I can't accept that. I have to believe that when I kill you, something changes. Something heals." "It won't," I said quietly. "I know, because I've killed a lot of people hoping the same thing. But the hole never fills, Victor. You just dig it deeper. He raised his gun. I raised mine. Two men standing in the fading light, both knowing this was always how it had to end. I'm sorry about your father, I said, and meant it. Not sorry enough to have done anything differently, but sorry that you had to watch. Sorry that I made you into this. Don't, he replied. Don't pretend you care. Don't insult me with false sympathy. Just, let's end this. One of us walks away, the other doesn't. Clean. Simple. The way these things should be. I nodded. On three? On three. We both counted. Both fired. But I was faster. Victor Castellano died on a runway in the fading light, staring up at the sky as if searching for answers that weren't there. His last words were, "I'm sorry, Papa." Not to me. Not to anyone living. Just an apology to a ghost who'd been dead for 12 years. For a revenge that had consumed his life and given him nothing in return. I felt nothing as I watched him die. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Just the familiar emptiness that came with ending a life. Like crossing off an item on a to-do list. Victor had wanted me to feel his pain. Instead, I just felt tired. Dante came up beside me, looking down at the body. It's done. Yeah, I said. It's done. We left Victor there for the authorities to find. Another unsolved shooting in a city full of them. Let the police spin their theories about drug deals gone wrong or criminal rivalry. The truth was simpler and sadder. A boy had watched his father die and spent his entire adult life trying to avenge it. Only to learn that revenge was just another word for emptiness. The drive back to the city was quiet. My men kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering if I was going to fall apart now that the war was over. But I'd learned a long time ago that falling apart was a luxury for people who had time to be fragile. I had an organization to rebuild, families to compensate for their losses, and a city to convince that Don Antonio Volante was still someone to fear and respect. The first thing I did was visit the families of the men I'd lost. Nico's 3-year-old daughter, now without a father. Tomas's fiancée, her wedding canceled and replaced with a funeral. Giovanni's elderly mother, trying to understand why her son wasn't coming to visit anymore. Luca's brother, suddenly the man of the family at 19 years old. I gave them money, enough that they'd never have to worry about finances again. It wasn't enough. Money never was. But it was all I had to offer besides the cold comfort that their loved ones' deaths had been avenged. Some of them thanked me. Others just stared with eyes that accused me of being the reason their family was broken. Both reactions were fair. Lucia, the restaurant owner, recovered slowly. The burns would scar her for life, and her son was still dead. But at least she was alive. I set up a new restaurant for her in a safer neighborhood, far from anything connected to my business. She never spoke to me again, which was probably wise. Ivy and Violet were relocated to Seattle under new identities. I kept my promise, set up trust funds for both of them, ensured they'd have opportunities their old lives never would have provided. Dante reported that Ivy had enrolled in community college, studying to be a nurse. Her sister was thriving in a private school, making friends, playing soccer. Normal lives for normal people who'd been briefly caught in abnormal circumstances. I never contacted them. Never checked in beyond the occasional report confirming they were safe. They'd saved my life, and the best thank you I could give them was to stay out of theirs.
The commission meeting I'd promised happened 2 weeks later. I showed up with documentation proving Victor Castellano was dead, along with detailed information about every resource he'd used to wage his war. I handed it all over freely, no strings attached, a gesture of good faith that I was serious about ending hostilities. "So what now?" Sophia Marchetti asked, lighting another cigarette. "You rebuild your empire? Go back to business as usual?" "Something like that," I replied, "though I'm thinking maybe smaller, quieter. I've had enough excitement to last me a while." "You're going soft in your old age," Jackson Chen said with a slight smile. "Next thing you'll tell us is you're retiring to Florida." "Maybe I will," I said, and part of me almost meant it. Or maybe I'll just remember what happens when you forget that power attracts enemies like blood attracts sharks. Victor came after me because I was visible, made myself a target. I'm thinking maybe it's time to be less of a target and more of a ghost. They didn't believe me. I could see it in their faces. Once you reach a certain level in this world, you don't just step back. You don't retire to Florida and play golf. You either keep climbing or you fall. And falling usually meant dying. They figured I'd be back to my old, aggressive self within a year. Maybe they were right. Or maybe losing almost everything I'd built had taught me that empires aren't worth dying for, especially when they're built on foundations that can be corrupted from within. I did rebuild, but differently. Smaller operations, more compartmentalized, fewer people with access to sensitive information. I promoted Dante to a position of equal authority. Better to have someone I could trust sharing the burden than trying to control everything myself. We established protocols, redundancies, checks and balances designed to prevent anyone from doing what Vincent Moretti had done. The penthouse I'd shared with Serafina got sold. I couldn't be there anymore. Couldn't walk through rooms where we'd made memories that turned out to be lies. I moved to a smaller place across town, functional rather than ostentatious. A place to sleep, not a home. I wasn't ready for homes yet. The dreams came, of course, every night for months. Sometimes I was back in La Stella d'Oro, watching Ivy's hand shake as she tried to pass me the note. Sometimes I was standing over Victor's body, listening to him apologize to his dead father. Sometimes I was holding Serafina, and she was whispering that she loved me, and I was too stupid to hear the lie beneath the words. I'd wake up alone, in a place that wasn't home, and remember that this was the price of the life I'd chosen. Solitude, suspicion, the knowledge that anyone who got close enough to touch you was close enough to kill you. But there were good moments too, small victories that almost made it worthwhile. 6 months after Victor's death, I got a letter. No return address, postmarked from Seattle. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short message written in careful, unpracticed handwriting. Dear Mr. Volante, my sister doesn't know I'm writing this. She'd be mad if she knew. But I wanted to say thank you for what you did for us. We have a nice house now, and I'm doing good in school. My teacher says I'm really smart. Ivy is studying to help sick people. She's really happy, even though sometimes I catch her looking sad when she thinks I'm not watching. I don't really understand what happened that night or why we had to leave everything behind. Ivy won't talk about it. But I know that whatever you did, it meant we got to be safe. So thank you. I hope you're happy too. Violet. I read that letter probably 100 times, kept it in my desk drawer, pulling it out whenever I needed to remember that not everything I touched turned to ash, that sometimes the violence I was capable of could protect instead of destroy, that a 12-year-old girl with braids and a stuffed elephant could be safe somewhere because I'd been fast enough, angry enough, ruthless enough to stop the people who wanted to hurt her. It wasn't redemption. I'd done too much to ever be redeemed. But it was something. A small light in a very dark world. Dante found me one night, sitting in my new apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. "You okay, boss?" "Define okay," I replied. "Not actively dying or planning someone's murder?" "Then yeah, I guess I'm okay." I turned to look at him. "Do you ever wonder what we'd be doing if we'd made different choices? If we'd stayed clean, lived normal lives?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember that normal lives require normal childhoods, and neither of us had those. We are what we are, Antonio. The question isn't what we could have been. It's what we do with what we've become." "And what have we become?" "Survivors," he said simply. "In a world designed to kill people like us, we survived. That counts for something." Maybe it did. Or maybe we were just cockroaches surviving the apocalypse while better people burned. I wasn't philosopher enough to know the difference. The first year after Victor's death was the hardest. Every time someone got too close, I flinched. Every time a new person entered my organization, I ran background checks that would have impressed intelligence agencies. Every time I started to feel comfortable, I remembered Serafina's smile as she ordered my last meal, and the paranoia came flooding back. Trust, I learned, was like a vase that had been shattered. You could glue the pieces back together, but it would never hold water the same way again. There would always be cracks where betrayal could seep through. But slowly, impossibly, life continued. The city forgot about the war between Volante and Castellano, moving on to new scandals and new violence. My businesses stabilized. The other families kept their peace. The commission held an uneasy alliance of criminals who understood that cooperation was more profitable than constant warfare. I never tried to replace Serafina, never looked for another relationship, another attempt at normalcy. Some wounds don't heal. They just become part of your landscape, a permanent scar that reminds you of lessons learned in blood. But I did make one change. Every month, anonymously, I sent money to a scholarship fund for kids from rough neighborhoods, kids who'd grown up like I had, in poverty and violence, watching their parents destroy themselves while the world looked away. It wasn't much. Wasn't enough to balance the scales for all the lives I'd taken. But maybe, just maybe, one of those kids would get an opportunity I never had, a chance to make different choices, to be something other than what survival demanded. Dante asked me about it once. "Why the scholarship fund? Trying to buy your way into heaven?" "Heaven doesn't take bribes," I replied. I keep thinking about Victor, how different his life could have been if someone had given him options besides revenge, if someone had shown him that there were other ways to process grief and anger. Maybe if I'd been less visible, less aggressive, less everything, maybe his father would still be alive. Maybe he'd be living some normal life instead of dying on a runway. "You can't save everyone, Antonio." "No," I agreed. "But maybe I can save a few, and maybe that'll be enough to let me sleep at night." 2 years after La Stella d'Oro, I was sitting in a coffee shop, just a regular coffee shop, no criminal activity, no hidden meetings.
I was reading the newspaper, drinking an overpriced latte, pretending to be a normal citizen for an hour. A young woman sat down across from me, auburn hair pulled back in a bun, tired eyes that had seen too much. It took me a moment to recognize her. "Ivy." "Mr. Volante," she said quietly. "I thought that was you."
Small world.
"Too small sometimes," I replied, suddenly tense. "Is everything okay? Your sister?" "She's fine. We're both fine. Better than fine, actually. I graduate nursing school next month. Violet's thriving. We're happy." She paused, studying me. "Are you?" "That's a complicated question. Most important ones are." She fidgeted with her coffee cup. "I've thought about that night a lot. Wondered if I did the right thing. If passing you that note saved your life or just prolonged all the violence." "You saved my life," I said firmly. "Everything that happened after, that was my choice, my responsibility. You gave me a chance to survive. What I did with that chance is on me." Did you kill them? The people who were trying to kill you?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Good. That makes me a terrible person, doesn't it? Being glad people died?" "It makes you human," I replied. "They were planning to murder your sister if you didn't cooperate. Being glad they're dead just means you love your sister more than you love abstract morality. That's not terrible. That's just being honest about what we'd all do for the people we love." We sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd been thrown together by violence and separated by necessity, now meeting again in the most mundane of circumstances. "I wanted to say thank you," Ivy said finally, "for what you did for us. The new identities, the money, all of it. You didn't have to do any of that." "Yes, I did," I replied. "You risked everything to save a stranger. That kind of courage deserves to be rewarded, not punished." "Dante said you ask about us sometimes. Make sure we're okay." "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. How to explain to this young woman who'd shown more courage in one moment than most people manage in a lifetime why a criminal like me would care about her well-being. "Because everyone who's been kind to me has either betrayed me or died," I said finally. "You were kind, and you survived. I need to believe that's possible. That goodness doesn't always get punished. So yeah, I check on you. Sue me for wanting something in my life to have a happy ending." Ivy smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you. I figured you'd hate me for dragging you into my world. I thought I would too. But honestly, that night changed my life. Not just the money and the new start, but it showed me that I was capable of being brave when it mattered, that I could make a difference. That's why I went into nursing, because I learned that sometimes one person's courage at the right moment can save a life. I want to do that. I want to be the person who shows up when everything's falling apart. The world needs more people like you," I said, meaning it. "Maybe," she replied, standing to leave. "But it needs fewer people like Victor Castellano. Fewer people who let hatred consume them until there's nothing left but revenge. So maybe your real job isn't building an empire or running criminal enterprises. Maybe it's making sure more kids like Victor have options besides becoming what he became." She left then, disappearing into the morning crowd, leaving me alone with my expensive coffee and her words echoing in my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe the scholarships weren't just performative guilt management. Maybe they were the most important thing I'd done since crawling out of poverty with nothing but anger and determination. Maybe saving people from becoming like me was more valuable than anything else I'd accomplished. Or maybe I was just getting old and sentimental, trying to find meaning in a life that had been defined by violence and betrayal. 3 years after La Stella d'Oro, I stood in front of a mirror getting dressed for a business meeting. Same expensive suits, same careful grooming, same man staring back at me, but different somehow. Quieter, less hungry for power and more interested in stability, less interested in empire building, and more focused on maintaining what I had without destroying myself or others in the process. The scar from the bullet wound had faded to a thin line on my arm. Physical wounds heal. Emotional ones just become part of who you are. Dante knocked on the door. "Ready? The commission meeting starts in an hour." "Yeah," I said, adjusting my tie. "I'm ready." As we walked to the car, he asked, "Do you ever regret it? Any of it?" "Which part?" I replied. "Killing Victor? Building this empire? Trusting Serafina? There's a lot to choose from." "All of it. The whole journey. If you could go back to that 7-year-old kid watching his father die in a gutter, would you tell him to choose differently?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "No," I said finally. Because that kid didn't have choices. He had survival or death. And everything that came after, all the violence, all the empire building, all the betrayals and wars, they were just echoes of that fundamental truth. Some people are born into worlds that offer options. Some of us are born into worlds that offer survival. But at some point, you had options, Dante pushed. You could have walked away, built something legitimate, been someone different. Maybe, I admitted. But by the time I had options, I was already too far down this road to turn back. And honestly, I'm not sure I wanted to. This world, as violent and ugly as it is, makes sense to me. The rules are clear. Everyone knows what they're getting into. There's a brutal honesty to it that I prefer over the hypocrisy of legitimate society. Even after everything? Even after Serafina? Especially after Serafina, I said. Because at least in my world, when someone wants you dead, they have the courtesy to try to kill you themselves. They don't seduce you for 8 months first. Dante laughed darkly. Fair point. We drove in comfortable silence. 2 men who'd survived more than most people could imagine, heading toward just another day of running an empire built on sand and held together with threats. But as we drove, I found myself thinking about Ivy, about Violet, about the scholarship recipients who were getting chances I never had, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, some of my violence had protected something worth protecting. I thought about Victor's last words. "I'm sorry, Papa." A boy apologizing to a ghost for failing to achieve a revenge that would have given him nothing even if he'd succeeded. A life wasted on hatred that couldn't be satisfied. I'd won our war, survived when everyone expected me to die, rebuilt what he'd tried to destroy. By any measure, I should feel victorious. Instead, I just felt tired and grateful. Grateful that a terrified waitress had been brave enough to slip me a note. Grateful that Dante had survived the ambush outside the restaurant. Grateful that I'd been fast enough to outdraw Victor on that runway. Grateful for small moments of grace in a life defined largely by violence. Maybe that's what surviving long enough teaches you. Not that you were right, or justified, or heroic. Just that you were lucky. And that luck, more than anything else, determines who lives and who dies in this world. The city stretched out before us as we drove. Millions of people living their lives, completely unaware of the wars fought in shadows, the empires built on blood money, the complex web of loyalty and betrayal that kept the underworld functioning. Somewhere in that city, Lucia was serving carbonara in her new restaurant. Nico's daughter was growing up without her father. Violet was probably in school, learning and laughing and being a normal kid. Ivy was studying to save lives instead of being destroyed by the violence that had briefly touched her. And I was still here, still fighting, still surviving, still trying to figure out what it meant to be Don Antonio Volante in a world that had tried very hard to kill him. The meeting went well. The commission was stable, business was flowing, and nobody was trying to murder anyone. In my world, that counted as a good day. Afterward, Dante and I grabbed dinner at a small Italian place. Not La Stella d'Oro, never there again, but somewhere similar. Quiet, elegant. The kind of place where you could almost forget the blood on your hands if you didn't look too closely. To survival, Dante said, raising his glass. To survival, I echoed. And to the people who make it possible. We drank to that, to Ivy's courage, to Dante's loyalty, to dumb luck and fast reflexes, to all the tiny moments that add up to determine whether you live or die. And somewhere in Seattle, I hoped, two sisters were having dinner too, laughing, planning futures that didn't involve violence or fear, living the lives that their courage and my violence had made possible. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't even close. But it was something. And in a life like mine, something was enough. I never remarried. Never tried to replace what Serafina had pretended to be. The penthouse stayed empty, eventually sold to someone who had no idea about its history. I moved through life like a ghost, present but not really there, engaged in my empire but disconnected from anything resembling genuine human connection. But every year, on the anniversary of that night at La Stella d'Oro, I visited the graves of Nico, Tomas, Giovanni, and Luca. Left flowers, told them I was sorry, promised them that their families would never want for anything. And every year, I received a letter from Seattle. Just a few sentences from Violet, telling me about her year, school achievements, new friends, her sister's graduation from nursing school, and then her first job at a children's hospital. Small updates about lives that were growing and thriving far from the world that had almost destroyed them. I never responded. Never made contact beyond ensuring the money kept flowing. But I kept every letter, filed away in a locked drawer, proof that sometimes violence protected instead of destroyed. That sometimes the monsters could do monstrous things for reasons that weren't entirely monstrous. 5 years after La Stella d'Oro, I walked into that same coffee shop and saw Ivy again. She was wearing scrubs this time, obviously on a break from work, looking tired but content. "Mr. Volante," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Twice in one lifetime. What are the odds?" "In a city of 8 million? Pretty good, actually." I gestured to the empty seat across from her. "May I?" She nodded, and I sat down. Two people bound by a night that had changed both our lives forever. "Violet tells me you're working at Children's Hospital," I said. Her eyes widened. "You read her letters?" "Every one. I never respond because I don't want to complicate your lives, but yeah, I read them. She's a good kid. You should be proud." "I am." Ivy smiled, and there was no fear in it anymore, just warmth. "She's applying to colleges now. Wants to study environmental science, save the planet. Big goals for a kid from where we came from. She can afford big goals, I replied. The trust fund will cover any school she gets into. About that, Ivy said carefully. We've talked about whether we should use your money, whether accepting it makes us complicit in whatever it is you do. But Violet pointed out something I couldn't argue with. She said that if your money can give her the education to make the world better, then maybe that's the best use of money that came from darkness, turning it into light. I felt something in my chest tighten. She's smarter than both of us. Yeah, Ivy agreed. She really is. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking our coffee, watching the city move around us. Can I ask you something? Ivy finally said. Anything. Are you happy? I mean, really happy? After everything that happened, after getting your revenge, after surviving, did it give you what you wanted? I thought about how to answer that. How to explain to someone who'd chosen to save lives than I'd spent mine taking them. Happiness is probably the wrong word, I said slowly. But I'm at peace, which is more than I expected. I survived something that should have killed me. I protected some people who deserved protecting. I eliminated a threat that wouldn't have stopped until one of us was dead. And somewhere in Seattle, two sisters get to live normal lives because I was fast enough and ruthless enough when it mattered. That's not happiness, but it's enough. Ivy reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Just a brief touch. Human connection from someone who had every reason to hate me, but chose compassion instead. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything. For being fast enough that night. For protecting Violet. For giving us chances we never would have had. I know you're probably not a good man by most measures, but you've been good to us, and that counts for something. After she left, I sat alone in that coffee shop for a long time, staring at the place where her hand had touched mine. Such a small gesture. Such a monumental reminder that I was still human underneath all the violence and calculation. Don Antonio Volante. Crime boss. Killer. Survivor. But also the man who'd protected two innocent sisters from a world that would have chewed them up and spit them out. Both things were true. Both things would always be true. And maybe that was okay. Maybe people weren't meant to be entirely good or entirely evil. Maybe we were all just doing our best with the tools we were given, in the worlds we were born into. Making choices that seemed right at the time, even if they looked monstrous from the outside. I walked out of that coffee shop into the afternoon sun, heading back to my empire, my responsibilities, my carefully constructed life, built on foundations of violence and maintained through constant vigilance. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty. I felt something almost like contentment, not happiness. I probably lost my right to that a long time ago. But the quiet satisfaction of knowing that some of my violence had mattered, that some of my brutality had protected instead of destroyed, that somewhere in Seattle, a girl with big dreams could afford to chase them because a monster had been just human enough to care. Imagine sitting down for your engagement dinner, only to realize it's actually your funeral. I'd survived mine, learned that the only person who'd truly cared about my life was a stranger willing to risk everything to save it. And in return, I'd given her and her sister a chance at the lives they deserved. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close to balancing the scales for all the lives I'd taken. But it was something. And in a life like mine, something was everything. The city stretched out before me, full of people living and dying, loving and betraying, surviving and failing. Somewhere in those streets, other wars were being fought. Other empires were rising and falling. Other Don Antonios were learning that trust was a luxury that could get you killed. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I'd fought my war, survived my betrayal, eliminated my enemies. Now I just had to figure out what came next for a man who'd spent his entire life learning to survive, and almost none of it learning to live. Maybe that was the real challenge. Not surviving the assassination attempt, not winning the war with Victor, but learning to be human again after spending so long being a weapon. As I walked through the city streets, heading back to my empire, I found myself smiling. A real smile, not the calculated expressions I wore for business meetings and negotiations. Because somewhere in Seattle, two sisters were probably sitting down to dinner, laughing, planning their futures, living the lives that a terrified waitress's courage and a killer's protection had made possible. And that, I decided, was enough. That was victory. That was the happy ending I'd never expected to find in a life defined by violence and betrayal. Not perfect, not clean, not this storybook ending where the monster becomes a prince, but real, honest, true. And in my world, truth was the most valuable currency of all.